Welcome back. Today we're going to venture even further in pursuit of King Vendrick. Not before finding this chest, however. Now, given the way that this water works and the way that it's lit, this chest could be more or less everywhere. Anywhere. A chest being everywhere would be... that'd be a hell of a chest. At any rate, if you're looking for it yourself, just go to the right side. It's a little bit nicer because it's a wooden chest. And those stick up above the water a little bit. The iron chests don't, and they sort of match the tone. It's just a bunch of magic arrows anyway, so you don't really have to go out of your way for it. Free is free, but up to a point. It's sort of like, why bother? Unfortunately, we must disregard the sign's advice because down is the only way to go. You might have noticed that we're wielding a different weapon now. This is the Archdrake Warhammer, and it is a halberd type weapon, except that it is classified as a great hammer and it does strike damage. I would say that it's probably one of my favorite strike damage type weapons, just because the range gives it a lot of versatility that other hammers do not have. And it's not too difficult to wield or find either. They drop pretty often from the Archdrake soldiers. The Undead Crypt is our next destination. Before we go in, though, let's just light this bonfire. Oh, it's this guy again. Enormous and disheveled as ever. Of course we still desire peace. That doesn't necessarily mean we want the other stuff, though.
Vendrick, the real true monarch, is here, and not far. But what is your king? You, neither born with greatness nor grounded in my flames. What is it you seek? The Canadian say yourself.
Well, to be honest, we can say what we seek. We seek the damn king. And if this tangled mass of roots and fire is to be believed, the king is nearby. So, we're getting close to achieving our goal. Whoever this fella is, he has some interesting things to say about the roots of the human world. As an aside, before the Scholar of the First Sin patch, that bonfire in front of the stairs was actually behind the stairs in that little alcove, making it obnoxiously easy to miss. Naturally, the crypt area has its own fair share of skeletons. Judging by what he said, it seems that humans weren't always mortal, and that perhaps undeath is our natural state. And that's a little weird. Be sure to take this guy out, by the way. The reason why will become apparent. Now, this room might actually be the most challenging room in the entire place. We have to face 3 Lady of Witches. They're powerful spellcasters that can cast just about anything, really. They've got hexes, they've got miracles, sorceries, and even some pyromancies. There are a couple of ways to tackle this room. Range combat is, of course, always an option. It's probably the safest, albeit the slowest. This is another fairly safe way, albeit another fairly slow way. By eliminating these hollows before you take on the witches, you have quite a bit more room to maneuver without worry of getting clipped by something. Magic Barrier, or its big brother, Great Magic Barrier, will help you a lot here. Once you advance past a certain point, the sheer volume of spells being flung at you becomes kind of unmanageable. Your best bet is to close the distance as quickly as you can, and then stunlock the witches before they can really cast anything. Now, if you run out of stamina or you get thwarted by elevation differences, that can be difficult. So if things get dicey, just back off, hide behind a pillar, drink a flask. The poison is actually probably their most dangerous attack because it poisons you so quickly and it's almost impossible to see. Having a supply of poison moss on hand can save your life here. When there's just one left, they're fairly easy to deal with. They don't have a lot of poise, though if you're using a longer weapon that does a sweeping motion, you can get obstructed by a pillar. If you are using a halberd type weapon, then the one-handed attacks will probably serve you better here. The Lady of Witches have a variety of valuable drops, such as Simpleton Spice. If you were so inclined, you could farm them indefinitely and be able to cast any sorcery in the game, but that would take a long time and be sort of, I don't know.
Halt. Human, do not produce light. Light, and all those who bear it, are unwelcome in this place.
Somebody engaging us in conversation is quite unusual. These Grave Wardens here are actually completely docile and will not attack you unless you attack them, or a certain other condition is fulfilled. This fellow is the source of the warning.
I am Agdayn, guardian of the crypt. Countless dead rest here in peace, cradled by the comfort of dark. Light only agitates. We have no need for it here. I am a finito. We weave death and watch over the dead. This task was granted to me by the one who gave us the first death. Countless souls rest here. Some of them from ages long ago. Some were rich, others poor. Some wise, some dull, but now they're all just dead.
Gonna go ahead and pop a soul here, because once we exhaust his dialogue, he will become a merchant. And he does have something I want.
Did you come for him? The one called Vendrick. You will find him deeper inside. Many castle servants and the like have come to fetch their lord. But they rest here now, put to death by the king's own guards. Perhaps he's not in the mood for company. In the past, humans were one with the dark. The former King of Light, he feared humans. Feared that they would usher in an age of dark. How queer you humans. How you go on, never separating truth from fiction. This place is welcome to all, provided due reverence is shown. Death is equitable, accepting. We will all one day be welcomed by her embrace. Tell me what you desire. Show me reverence, and I will lend you my hand.
Grave Warden Agdayn is a very, very reasonable guy, to be honest.
I am a finito.
He doesn't have anything more to say, though. As long as we follow the one simple rule of not using light in here, such as cast light or a torch, he is completely cool with us and will even sell us stuff for pretty reasonable prices. The shield of the Insolent is another stamina regen shield, but since we got the Slumbering Dragon one, I don't really feel like spending the souls on it. He also sells an upgraded version of the Ring of Thorns and dark bolts and dark arrows, as well as a mess of human effigies and Elizabeth mushrooms. The real winner here, I think, is the Warmth Pyromancy. This is actually a healing spell that creates a beacon that will heal anything in its range over time. It's fairly powerful, and if you use it correctly, it can give you a really nice sort of safe haven, a place to retreat to. It does affect enemies, but if you're careful, there's really no reason that they should benefit from it. So since Agdayn has been so nice to us, I am going to follow his instructions and not light any lights here. It's not exactly dimly lit either, compared to some of the places we've been. Oh, it's safe down there. Okay, the sign wasn't lying. Not that safe. Okay. Okay. Our message was rated, so worth it. I'm not sure which one, but, you know. Alright. Taking that one from the top, going to switch weapons here to something that doesn't have quite so much follow-through. And now I need to reconfigure my equip weight. Fortunately, I believe I've mentioned this before, at exactly 70% you can roll and maneuver just fine. 1% or even a fraction of a percent over, you're in trouble. But at exactly 70, you have nothing to worry about. With a slightly more powerful weapon equipped, I'm more confident in simply rushing this room down. This is pretty much always a risky proposition, but it's certainly doable, and after that regrettable tumble off the side, I'm not as inclined to take it slow and steady. This is usually, of course, a recipe for disaster, so don't follow my example here. But when you're on camera, you have to make the hard choices. Fortunately, the Helix Halberd just destroys these witches. 2 strong stabs is just enough to put them down. And they're not exactly fragile either. They don't have a lot of poise, but they've got some significant endurance. The Black Witch's Staff is, in my opinion, probably the best catalyst in the game, simply because it gives you so many options. When you equip it, you have, much like the Lady of Witches, the ability to cast sorceries, hexes, and miracles all with one catalyst without switching.
Human.
Shut up, Agdayn, I'm talking. It can't cast pyromancies, unfortunately, but it's also got good scaling with stats, and it's just all around really useful, especially if you have a wide variety of spells you like to use. Our character here is sort of a simpleton, so it's not especially useful, especially since it can't do pyromancies, which is our main form of magic. But maybe in the future. Alright, let's try exploring this area down here without tumbling off immediately afterwards. Speaking of simpletons, we get Simpleton Spice and the Soul of a Great Hero for our trouble. This is not a mandatory area, but the reward is pretty nice for the time invested. Up this ladder is the way back, another hollow, and also a chest. We get a fire seed and a crushed eye orb. The crushed eye orb is a special item that we will discuss a bit later. For now, rest assured that it doesn't really do anything important until the proper and allotted time. Backstabs remain finicky as always, even though these should really be easy, given how open these guys leave themselves, but I don't know. Flaw of the game engine, I guess. Or flaw in my play, possibly. I don't think I'm fucking anything up, but evidently I am. There's another secret drop-down area here. If you light this statue with a torch, you will light up the entire place like a Christmas tree. However, as we have sworn not to do that, and due to the fact that it's not useful at all, I think we're just gonna leave that be. I mean, yes, the main sort of like expansive chasm area that we're in now, it's a little dim, but you can see everything you need to just fine. It's not the gutter. Oops. By taking this detour, we pop out right next to a bonfire, bypassing the fog wall entirely. It's always sort of weird when you can do that. Progressing into the second part of the crypt, things change a little bit. In this area, with all these, what appear to be tombstones, hollows will periodically rise from the ground and come after you. Because they're just your garden variety hollows without any weapons or much of anything to their name, they're not at all threatening. It's just, it will continue to happen for quite some time, if not indefinitely. The tombstones serve mostly to just obstruct your path, but you can break through them with just about anything. It will take weapon durability, though, and the Helix Halberd is not the most durable of weapons, so I might end up paying for this a little. Now, these more fancy tombstones with the statues are special. They will spawn Lady Pyromancers. These Pyromancers do not follow the normal rules of enemy spawning. They will continue to spawn as long as the headstone stands and you are in a fairly short vicinity within them. you have to be pretty close to spawn them. So if you just want to leave them alone and leave them up for later farming purposes, if you so desire, that is a perfectly viable thing to do. Personally, I would recommend on your first time through this area taking out all of them here except one or two. Now, the pyromancers are fairly difficult foes. They're not particularly durable, like the witches were, but they are much more adept in melee combat, and they have some very, very powerful pyromancies at their disposal, so they can kill you pretty easily if you let them. That's why I recommend, even if you plan to farm them later, you should probably take out most of the stones. I'll admit, this area can get a little obnoxious, just because it looks like there are some places you can go through that you can't, and vice versa. Taking this secret path up here is actually kind of important, because making it through the next room with this witch sniping at you is actually pretty darn difficult. It's possible because it's a short room and you can just sort of blow by her, but it's not something I would really recommend. Especially since there's a chest up here too. The dried finger is a unique item that, when used, I believe will reset invasion timers in your world. So if you're into some PvP and you want people to invade you, you can just sort of use that as soon as somebody is vanquished or you are vanquished, and you will be eligible for an invasion again. At least that's what I think. That might actually be what the red cord does, which you can buy from Titchy Gren. If it's not one, then it's the other. Now, I feel like I'm not really giving these guys enough of a shot here, because I haven't really gone into how badly they can mess you up. That single spell nearly killed Hal in one shot. And that single combo nearly did the same thing. And their fireballs have AoEs to them. So, don't fight them if you can help it. They're pretty strong. They're pretty dangerous. Not insurmountable, but when you're making these journeys, you do want to minimize your risk if you can. Now, fortunately for us, all of the headstones that we took out actually stay dead. They will not respawn even if you cause an area transition. That's why I recommend leaving one alive, just, you know, in case you find yourself wanting a drop a lot later. Because the pyromancers, like the witches, drop some pretty darn valuable things. Including, potentially, the most powerful short sword in the game. Bracing Knuckle Ring +2 will very, very severely decrease the rate at which your weapon degrades. If it did anything else, I'd probably equip it, but at this point I have enough repair powder that I'm not concerned. The Nameless Usurper makes a return here. Evidently not satisfied with her defeat at Dranglake Castle, she is still after King Vendrick and us for some reason. And she fights pretty much the same way she did back then. She's still fairly weak to long-range weapons. She doesn't have a lot of poise, and her attacks don't do an awful lot of damage. For lighter characters, if she does manage to get in on you and start comboing, that can be trouble. But if you have even a little bit of poise, then you'll probably be fine. Behind this secret door lies a unique weapon. Also ghosts. Fuck off, ghosts. The ghosts are not threatening enemies, by the way. Largely because they're immobile. They have decent reach with their huge swords, but after one surprise attack, you probably won't get clipped again. Anyway, in that chest was the Aegdayn. The Aegdayn is a unique crossbow that will fire 3 bolts at once instead of 1. They are slightly less powerful to make up for that, but once fully upgraded, the Aegdayn is probably the most powerful crossbow in terms of damage per second. It sort of suffers from the usual crossbow weaknesses of no scaling and being fairly heavy, but it's a really effective offhand weapon if you have the strength and capacity to wield it. I'll probably show it off a bit later. It also looks really cool, at least in my opinion. The way appears to be blocked by this wall. And ghosts. Can't forget the ghosts. This wall appears to be an enemy. Before engaging these mysterious walls, I would definitely recommend taking out any ghosts that you find. You're probably going to need to kite back a little bit here. It turns out that the walls were actually these guys. I believe these guys are called the Imperious Knights. They are large, in charge, and uniquely, they use their great shields to attack. The great shields are not a huge issue. They attack slowly, and they don't have great reach. They hurt, of course, because they're enormous slabs of metal. And they do sort of cause a problem when they just turtle behind them. Without something that sort of goes under the enemy's feet, like Fire Tempest, you'll have a difficult time piercing that defense. If you get caught up in one of their combos, you can get damaged pretty severely, because they do a lot of poise damage, and you will probably almost always stagger if you get hit. But provided you keep some distance, that probably won't happen, because they're also really slow. Going to switch to a different weapon here, because durability is running low. Dragon Slayer Spear is always a good fallback, though I don't actually notice that this puts me over encumbrance a little bit. Not until later. Down this pit is a pretty difficult challenge if you don't know what you're doing. It's another area where hollows will rise from the ground, and another with a bunch of Lady of Pyromancer tombstones. Now, you want to kill the hollows as soon as they spawn whenever possible. When hollows are not spawning, you want to go for the Pyromancer spawners, making your job quite a bit more difficult are the tombstones on the ground. As well as any pyromancers that do manage to spawn before you take out the headstones. Now, you might be wondering, why do you want to take out the hollows? They don't seem to do anything. In fact, They don't even attack you. What they do, however, is start ringing bells. And when the bells start ringing, the pyromancers start spawning regardless of where you are. So, in the likely event that you have not actually taken out all the stones by the time a bell has rung, then you are in a bit of a spot of bother. Because one pyromancer is really, it's bad enough, but multiple ones is almost impossible to deal with, especially in those kind of cramped quarters. When the bell starts ringing, you really want to just make a beeline for that passageway with the little groove in the middle. That leads you out, and it leads you to a very handy shortcut back to the other side with the bonfire. With the shortcut activated and this chest looted, I'm confident in going back in there and picking up the loot that we dropped. The loot that dropped that we missed. We didn't drop any loot. We are not a monster. We do not have a loot table, I'm pretty sure. If you want to take out the headstones quickly, your best bet is probably a strong, heavy weapon. Something like a great sword or maybe even a great hammer. Lighter weapons, like spears, will take quite a bit longer to get through the stone. Which, makes sense. A spear is not really a particularly useful tool for breaking through solid rock. Now, you might think the first thing you want to do is kill all of the hollows and silence the bells. However, if you do that, you will probably just get into an endless fight that you can't win. Instead, what you want to do is make a beeline for all of the spawning tombstones and take them out as soon as you can. That way, it doesn't matter if the bell is ringing. If all the tombstones are destroyed, then you don't have anything to worry about. This is the bell that will pretty much always get rung. One of the hollows will spawn basically right in front of it. Usually when you're dealing with another one, dealing with a bell in the middle of the room. And it's very difficult to prevent unless you both know that it's coming and you have a ranged weapon ready and waiting. It's honestly more bother than it's worth to stop it. I would just recommend doing what you can, running out when the bell starts ringing, and then coming back in. If you're clumsy, you can also ring the bell yourself if you hit it with a weapon. Now that all of the spawning stones are gone, that's not a problem. But if you get too overzealous in your attempt to silence the hollows, then you might end up in a grave of your own making. Before we proceed onward, we want to go back to the bonfire. Now that the shortcut is open, we don't have to bother with any of the area in between here and there. This is one of the few genuinely useful shortcuts in the game. The Undead Crypt in general is a pretty cool area that I like a lot. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even see that guy from that camera angle. I just sort of poked to get rid of a rock and then he died. Life is hard. Anyway, the only thing between us and the end of the area is this hallway. However, you really, really, really do not want to charge headfirst down here. Instead, you want to be thorough and make sure that you take this guy out without ringing the bell. As that message helpfully tells us, don't you dare. Do not hit that bell. If you do, then pyromancers will spawn from all sides on these indestructible sarcophagi. This is actually a really good farming spot for that reason, but if your goal is not to kill things over and over again and instead to get to the boss, then you are much better served just making sure that bell does not get rung. The reason for this is that the opposition facing you before the boss is already pretty stiff. You've got no fewer than 5 Cyan Knights, some of them wielding halberds. In fact, there's 7 all told. If you're confident in your parrying skills, then this is a great place to put them to work. If you're not, like me, then your best bet is probably just to go for backstabs. Pyromancy or magic spells or what have you might also work pretty well, since heavily armored enemies... How did that hit me? Heavily armored enemies are not particularly resistant, at least if you bypass the shields. So if you're gutsy, you can do the same thing that I did earlier with the Imperious Knights. It's a bit more difficult since these guys are quite a bit more proactive in aggroing you. Short of special tricks or ranged attacks, the best thing to do is to simply pull them out 1 or 2 at a time. It's not particularly fast, but it's safe and expedient. Don't feel like you have to go for critical strikes. Simply poking them down when they're open is a perfectly valid strategy. Sometimes it even takes less time simply because you don't have to deal with maneuvering around and then failing to backstab them. This is also probably the best place in the game to farm the Cyan set if you are interested. It really seemed to me like I was to that guy's side and not his back. Maybe they're more like side stabs. I know that was sort of true in the first game, but you'd think they would have fixed that. The final pair are probably the most difficult to take out because they don't like moving away from their little raised staircase. However, if you can coerce them to do so, it's easy to isolate them because they are enemies that are designed to guard the entrance, and thus are more than content to let you split them up. It's not a very good strategy, but who knows if these guys are hello? Who knows if these guys are hollow or what? They do one thing, they guard the door. Now, before we face the boss, I am going to take a moment to reconfigure my inventory. Gonna want to go back to the Dragon Slayer Spear for its general power and versatility. Equip the Slumbering Dragon Shield because actually blocking things in this next fight is next to impossible. Though first we need to equip a lighter set of gloves. If I was smart, I would have equipped the Leo Ring, but I wanted the protection from the Steel Ring. If you talk to him and don't light any lights, then Agdayn will actually help you here. You can summon him as an NPC. He also has an enormous sword. It's probably best not to cross him regardless of what you do. Anyway, with Agdayn summoned, I am perfectly content to try and fight the boss. This is Velstadt, the Royal Aegis. Judging by his lofty title, general stature, and shiny armor, I'm going to assume this is the king's last line of defense. Velstadt likes to attack by smashing people with his bell hammer, which is a really good design in my opinion. Now, be careful. This guy hurts. Not only does he hurt, he has a lot more stamina than you might think he does with such a huge weapon. He can keep swinging for quite some time and catch you off guard pretty easily. His attacks also have pretty good radial range because he swings so wide, so even if you think you're quite safely behind him, then you might not be, to be honest. Now, Agdayn does quite a bit of damage here, but he's not very smart. He doesn't like to even try avoiding moves, and he spends a lot of his time charging up a projectile hex that doesn't really do very much damage. Fortunately, we don't need him to stay alive in this fight. Now that does leave us with a bit of a problem. Midway through, Velstadt will stop, ring his sacred hammer, and power himself up with a dark hex. This means that he hits harder and takes less damage. He was already kind of a brick wall before, and now with that buff, as well as the fact that we came in here with 2 people and now have only 1, this could take a little while. The best way to deal with Velstadt is to stay at a distance until he opens himself up definitively. Don't jump the gun or you will get punished. It's safe to attack him usually after a dash attack or after 2 swings. However, play it by ear and don't get too greedy. If you're lucky and you stay far back, you can bait him into a projectile hex attack. This is quite easy to dodge, provided that you get close to him and circle around. It also leaves him very open, because he has to charge it up, like any sorcery or hex. If you play this fight cautiously, it's actually pretty easy. However, because he's so tough, it's also equally easy to jump the gun, get impatient, and get destroyed by his counterattacks. Fortunately, that wasn't too difficult, even though it was a bit time-consuming, and now nothing stands between us and the king. It's time to go have a long-awaited chat with this guy. God, the things that we've had to do to get here. Can you believe some of that stuff? We had to go into a sewer. What's that noise? Oh no. We found the king, guys. We found the king.